Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, giving you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Glad to have you aboard. So I'm, again, the owner of Wildlife Control Consultant, and so I'll be happy to have you visit my website. I've been making some changes over there, but in any event, we're here to talk today about some important issues within wildlife control operators and pest control operators that do vertebrate pest control. So got something on my mind, but first, before we do that, wanted to reach out and talk a little bit about my book. I don't have an official sponsor today, so I'm gonna sponsor myself. This is the Vertebrate Pest Handbook. I didn't write it. This is by Dr. Frischman. Basically, what it is, it's a series of questions and answers. So if you're looking for quizzes and question for your workers, perhaps want to create some quizzes to keep them on their toes and learning about vertebrate animals, you should always be learning, then this would be a great book for you. Or if you want to get one for yourself, so definitely pick it up. It's not long narrative, it's just simply question answer, and there's hundreds of them in each chapter. Let me kind of go over some of the chapters that are available for you. Chapter 1, rodents in general. 2, Norway rats. 3, roof rats. 4, house mice. 5, rodent diseases, if you're interested in learning about disease. Chapter 6, non-commensal rodents, and then vertebrate pests of pest vertebrates of other than rodents, then non-toxic rodent control methods, rodenticides, and then references for further training. So this is written by Dr. Frischman. I brought it back. It was out of print for a while. I'm in the process of doing some revision on it, but I can tell you there's still a lot of good information, and I've priced it right here. It's about $13. It's over 200 pages of material. You can get it at lulu.com, or you can pick it up at my website, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. So check it out. So today I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind a little bit, having gotten some criticism. It's basically, how do we handle criticism and how do we give criticism? There's a passage in Proverbs that says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So I think it's Proverbs 27. So we want to be in a position where we're helping each other. And as great as social media is today, the fact is that it's sometimes it's a bit harsh. There's a lot of benefits to it. We can share ideas. We can meet up with people. We can ask questions. We can toot our own horn for a little bit and tell the world, hey, things are going great. We can tell while we're proud about something. We can talk about different achievements and complain about politics and learn. There's a whole host of benefits to it. But we all recognize that there are certainly times when things can get a bit negative. And sometimes there's honest disagreements among people, but oftentimes we actually talk past each other, and some people just for some reason are just mean. They're angry, and they let the internet allow them as an expression to get that anger out. There are things that we do online that we would never do in person. And that's a problem. And I want to address that. And I'm not suggesting here that this is a huge issue for the wildlife control or the pest control community. I'm not asserting that. I am saying that it has been an issue at time, on occasion. And I'm wanting to give people some strategies to address some of these concerns without squelching honest debate or honest differences. But sometimes we're yelling at each other when we're really not disagreeing at all. We just have to sort of get our point in a little harder than perhaps we should. And so I have some strategies on doing that because I've experienced this personally. So I had a situation where I was put something out. And so why don't I just show it to you, right? So some of you may even remember that this happened. So let me pull up my iPhone here. So this was a photo I put out. Whoops. This was a photo I put out. Get it up there for you. Hopefully you can see all that pretty well. Get it right up there. This was a photo I put out, and I was pretty proud of it, but, it was basically a protected mouse station. It's produced by Bell Labs. I'm not here to plug Bell Labs. It's not my point here. My point is that Bell Labs claims that their protective mouse stations are suitable for outdoor use, which makes it a Tier 1 bait station. Now, those of you familiar with the 4 levels of the EPA for bait stations, Tier 1 is the best. Tier 4 is only to be used in an area that's secure, indoors, and where you don't have to worry about kids and pets getting at it. Basically, it's like a plastic box that you can just crush with your hands almost, right? So that's Tier 4. It's just to sort of hold the bait. So they claim it's a Tier 1, and so my concern is that too often, in my opinion, PCOs and probably wildlife control operators are using rat-sized bait stations when rats are not the problem. So we have this now 2-inch or 2.5-inch hole for an animal that only needs that much of a hole. And other animals are getting access to the bait, and we're having non-target poisonings. And I'm arguing that a simple way to resolve that, if you're not dealing with rats, put out a mouse station that's appropriate. So I had one complaint saying that it was, you shouldn't be using a brick because I glued it, but I didn't glue it to a brick. I glued it to a paver stone, which is significantly heavier than a brick. Okay. And I had some other complaints come out where a person said, well, that's awful, or something to that effect. And I said, well, look, it's not pretty. I'm not claiming that the photo was pretty. It's basically a mouse station glued to a paver. And other people were claiming, well, I'll have, dogs and raccoons in my area chew it all up. And I'm like, well, that's probably true. I don't have that problem. So this has sort of elevated this question for me, as how do we go about criticizing other people's work? And so I figured, let's use myself as this example. So I want to give you some strategies, first from the viewpoint of the person receiving the criticism. Okay, so we're going to start there. How do you, as you receive the criticism, how do you handle it? Well, my first bit of advice is toughen up. The internet is a kind of a contact sport at times, and so people can be mean, they can be harsh, and sometimes, to be fair, someone is not trying to be mean, but it just comes across mean. I mean, I'm familiar with the joke, and it's a very sexist joke, so kill me. All right. The point is a guy says, well, he's talking to his girlfriend, and he says something, and she's upset, and he says, honey, if there's 2 ways to take something and one pisses you off, I meant the other one. Right? And that's sometimes how we have to view comments about things that we put out on the web. We have to be prepared for not everything that's coming that we think is negative is actually intended to be negative, because we don't get nuance in words, right? A lot of people don't read very carefully on the internet. They kind of scan and they react, like the lizard brain they call, right? They're not processing the information in a very systematic way. They're just simply they see something, it triggers them, and they just respond. So you have to toughen up a little bit, and sometimes read the comments from the perspective that maybe the person's not trying to put you down. That's the first step. The second step is you have to ask yourself, is the person criticizing something as a matter of preference, or are they criticizing it based on concern for safety, or legality. So certainly, sometimes people criticize other things that have nothing to do with the law. It has nothing to do with safety. It's all a matter of personal preference, right? Potato, potato. And that needs to be understood. So sometimes people are criticizing something. It's like, okay, well, that's, you don't like chocolate ice cream. All right, I get it. But that's not really a substantive criticism, okay? So sometimes you just have to say, hey, is that really a safety issue, or is that just something you just have a preference for? The third issue that you need to consider, and that is, it's a big country, and we forget that sometimes. I forgot it, right? When I put out my picture here, right? Let me put it up again for you. There it is. A lot of people were very concerned about that, and they said, dogs and raccoons can get it. And you know what? They're right. That's true. This is a whole lot easier for a dog to bite on than a rat-sized bait station. That's absolutely true. Same way with a raccoon. Absolutely true. It was a legitimate comment, except for one thing. Those aren't problems where I live. So the criticism that came out, I'm assuming it was criticism, and certainly there was some concern there, so maybe I shouldn't call it criticism, right? Maybe we should say there was some concern. It was a legitimate concern, but in terms of my situation, I don't have a problem with free-range dogs. And we do have raccoons in Montana, but they are few and far between. Not a problem where I'm at. Plus, it's on my own property. So it's not something that's going to be sitting out where I'm not going to visit a location for 2 months or 3 months. I don't know how often some of you check your bait stations. Now, sometimes some of the criticism I got was, in effect, I consider illegitimate, where the one person says, well, what happens if my client gets rats? Well, then my answer to that was, well, then put in rat stations. But you don't simply put rat stations out because the person someday, sometime might in the future get rats. That's like saying, I should spray insecticide all over your house because you might get mosquitoes someday, or you might get bed bugs, or whatever the case may be. That's silly. That's not professional. So you have to evaluate, is this criticism and comment legitimate? And that means you have to have a teachable spirit. Now here's the kicker of it all. Some of the people that contacted me actually gave me ideas on how to modify my rat stations, which was awesome. One person suggested that I take a mason jar, cut a 3/4 inch hole in the metal top, and then put the poison inside the mason jar, and then put the mason jar inside the rat station. That way, although it has a 2.5 inch opening, when the animal got to the bait, they would be restricted to that 3/4 inch or 1 inch opening. It was genius. I was like, why didn't I think of that? I was so impressed with it, I actually made a video of it. You can go onto my YouTube channel and check it out for yourself. I even gave the individual credit for it. It was awesome. It's like, because what a clever idea that was. Now, is there anything wrong by definition using a mouse station? No. But for those of you in situations where if I didn't put that out there, I never would have learned how to modify my bait station in that way, because everyone was talking about putting, screen over the opening, and I'm not that handy. And I hate doing stuff, felt Mickey Mouse to a little bit. Some of you are very, very creative, and you have equipment and tools, and you're handy. I'm not handy. Some people write, people like me. Some people build stuff. Well, I don't really get into some of that, and I don't have a lot of equipment, and it's just different. Everyone's different. But that little idea with the mason jar with the hole in the lid, that was perfect, and it actually fit with my Aegis rat traps. Rat stations. It was beautiful. And I tried it out. I even did a little video of it. You can check it out for yourself. And if you use a smaller mason jar, I was using the full-size one. If you use a smaller one, I'm confident you could do it with a whole host of other bait stations, whatever brand you're deciding to use. I'm not here trying to push Bell Labs or Leaf Attack or bash somebody else. I'm just simply putting out other options for you, and check it out. It was an interesting way of modifying it. Best of both worlds. You had the heavy dutiness of a rat station modified so only mice can get at it, or mouse-sized animals can get at it. So if a squirrel got in there, it's like, well, good luck, squirrel. You're going to have some fun with this. Okay? It made it much harder for other animals to get that bait. Win-win all the way around. All right. So what are those 3 principles again? Number 1. Don't be so sensitive. That's a good lesson for all of us when we're dealing with the internet. Number 2, ask yourself the question, is this criticism a preference, or is it really about safety and legality? Number 3, context. Did you explain your situation to people out there to let them know that you thought about some of these other issues? And then number 4, are you willing to learn? Sometimes we get too wrapped up in our own ideas and we're not willing to handle criticism because we identify our self-worth with our ideas. And so we want to be sure we're always willing to learn. All right, let's flip this around. Let's say you're now the person criticizing. What are some things that you should keep in mind? We've already talked about what happens when you're getting the criticism. Now, how should you properly give criticism? Well, the first thing you got to do is don't be a jerk. Don't be mean. And sometimes people react to something on the web and they get a bit curt and snippy. Take a breath. I had a situation where I was commenting on the person was in an attic with no respirator, and I basically just pointed out, you should have a respirator to protect your health. I wasn't looking to bash the person. It wasn't my motivation. Boy, that person just got totally angry with me. And I tried to just simply de-escalate a little bit, just pointing out because they were questioning, my credentials, and I tried to give them a little information. That didn't work either. They just sort of leveled up a little bit more and got a little snippy back with me. And I finally got to the point of, look, it's not personal here. It's your health. You got to figure it out yourself. Then I was being lectured about how they can't wear a respirator. It's too hot. And that's why I did my presentation, that podcast on, yeah, you can wear a respirator if you get the right kind. And so that's why that podcast came out. So we have to be sure when we're looking at this is that sometimes we need to be sensitive to how other people are hearing us and asking yourself the question, how does this sound? So take a moment and evaluate what you're saying. It doesn't mean you're going to be interpreted correctly, but you know sometimes if you there are different ways to phrase things where you can trigger people a little bit easier. Another way to do that, rather than directly challenge someone, is ask a question. Is there a reason why you did it this way as opposed to this way? Now you're opening a dialogue with the person rather than just simply saying, you jerk, you idiot, you moron, why did you do it that way? Okay, obviously I'm being very extreme here because I'm trying to make a point. If you're trying to engage in a dialogue with someone and you're trying to help both of you learn and experience each other's ideas so that you can both improve your work, that is what you're looking for. I mean, there's an interesting book out there. I'm not trying to push the book per se, but his book is entitled Perpetual Beta. And it's basically, he's an educator, and he's very interested in how teams communicate and work together, and how people collaborate to create new ideas and work together to achieve certain goals. So he calls it Perpetual Beta. I love the title. In that sense, we're always in perpetual beta. If you think you're not in perpetual beta, there's something wrong. Because if you're not open to learning ideas, then that's a problem. I had a guy I knew once, and I said, well, why aren't you coming to this training event? And he says, oh, I'm not going to learn anything there. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, if you're God, there's nothing more for you to learn. He dismissed a conference he knew nothing about. Why? Because he already knew it all. That's amazing to me. It was actually wrong as well, but it just showed the level of arrogance this individual had. Okay? And sometimes that happens in our industry. We have people, they have their way, there's God's way, the right way, and my way, and it's always going to be my way. I had a friend of mine, he told me one day, he said, Stephen, the reason why I'm self-employed is I don't like being told what to do. I'm a bad employee. And you know what? Some people in this industry are self-employed, not really for the money, because some of them aren't making that much money, but because they simply can't handle anyone telling them what to do. And that's fine, as long as you realize it, but that also leaks out in terms of how they engage with people online, because they always have to be right. So that's certainly a problem. So make sure when you're criticizing something, or you're raising a question, or where you're saying something that someone might perceive as a criticism, ask yourself, how is this going to come across to this individual? Is there a way that I can phrase it that's going to be more constructive, to have a dialogue and a conversation, rather than just simply get this person's hackles up? Okay. Number 2, ask yourself the question, is this issue that I'm raising, is it a preference, or is it really about a safety and legal issue? Obviously, if something's a safety and legal issue, that's a higher level of concern than a preference. But sometimes we confuse those categories, right? Where we think something is safety or legal when it's really not. It's really a preference. And we need to be careful of that. Number 3, we need to be thinking about the context. You see, some of the people that were raising questions about my bait station, they were viewing it from the perspective of how it would work in their particular area. And I understand that. That makes perfect sense, because I forgot to think about their context. You don't know what you don't know. But they forgot about Montana. You see, a lot of people, when you're living in the city and you're living on the East Coast, or you're in the Ohio River Valley region, Kentucky, Illinois, and all those other states are a lot more populated. We have 1.2 million people in the state of Montana. That's it. So when you're looking at Montana, we have 1.2 million people. I had over 1 million people within 30 minutes of my house in western Massachusetts. In Montana, I have to drive 2 hours just to get to the Walmart. That's at 70 miles an hour. We have 6,000 people in my community. There's only 12,000 in the county. And by the way, to cross our county, it's 70 miles. Takes an hour to cross it, because we're allowed to drive 70 miles on our state highways, 70 miles an hour. That's in daytime. We have to go down to 65 at night. The point is we are not heavily populated out here. Okay, so it's hard for people in urban areas to appreciate how things are different. Same way I forget that they're working in an urban environment, and there's a lot more stuff going on. So we want to be sensitive to other people's context. This is something I would certainly encourage everyone to do, and that is when you're posting things sometimes, ask yourself the question, should I include the state that I'm in? Because I'm a part of some home inspector boards, and you'll have home inspectors, they'll be talking about something, and they'll say, well, that wasn't done, this needed to be done, this needed to be done. And one person will say, yeah, but that's not a requirement in our state. For example, some states require home inspectors to walk the roof. Other states don't. Some states require you to pull the back panel off of your fuse box. Dangerous, by the way, if you're pulling that panel off. Okay, because you get looking at live wires there. And that can be that's required in some states, but not in others. So you obviously will have two different inspectors looking at something, and they're saying, well, this should be done, and the other ones are, well, we don't have to do it. We're not required to do that. So sometimes we talk past each other, and we would get a negative opinion of other people because we don't understand that the rules are different and the context is different. So we need to be sensitive to that before we offer a criticism. This is why it's better to ask a question and engage the concept and try to avoid snarky remarks, where everything's a joke. Some people are always putting something on as a joke, and frankly, sometimes it's just tiresome because sometimes it's not that funny. Okay, so definitely think about that. And then finally, ask yourself, are you willing to learn even when you're offering the criticism? You may think you're the teacher because you're offering a criticism of what someone else has done, but are you willing to learn back? Just like the person you're criticizing has to be willing to learn, you, the criticizer, have to be willing to learn. And I think if we do this, if we take those attitudes of recognizing how are we phrasing something, are we being gracious and assuming the best in the comments of others? Are we considering context? Are we considering whether this is a preference or whether this is really a safety or legal issue? And then ultimately, are we willing to learn? And I think if we adopt this type of an attitude and approach with one another, we can make the internet and our Facebook group pages be even more valuable than it already is in terms of sharing information and ideas. But we have to make sure we have the emotional stability to do this because, frankly, sometimes people had bad experience in school. And so when they hear anything negative, their hackles are up and they're ready for a fight. And that doesn't help anyone. When the adrenaline's running, the rational side of our brain just shuts down. That's why you never want to deal with a kid who goes into a temper tantrum because rational thinking it's too late for that. They're in an adrenaline dump and there's nothing you're going to do about it. We don't want to create that in our online community. We want to be sure that we are working together to be the best wildlife control operators and PCOs that we can be, recognizing that there's always another level that we can go to. Let's work together and try to do that by checking our attitude, checking our ego, and making sure it's not about us putting our thumb down on other people, so that we work together and try to learn, because I've certainly learned stuff, and I hope you have too, and use this as a positive experience. I'm Stephen Vantassel. This is Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast. And why are we living the wildlife? Because I want you to live the wildlife, because I don't want you to be the wildlife. Love to hear your comments and concerns, questions, ideas, people I should interview. Perhaps you're one of those. Definitely reach out at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to chat with you about the opportunity. And if you're looking to sponsor the show, we'd love to have you. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the Pest Geek podcast. Let me know how I'm doing, good or bad. Yes, I'll have to even take your criticisms in a positive light as well. I hope you found this to be helpful. Hey, don't forget, I want you to be careful out there. Take care.